Miss Marvel episode 4.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Karachi.
Okay, you know, I've been really complimentary about the show up until this point, and I will say this, they went to Karachi and 80% of the way they got it right. But look, I was born in a family where my dad, my grandfather, and my uncle all worked for Pakistan International Airlines, PIA, the flagship carrier of Pakistan. And so from the early days of Jinnah International Airport, when it was still basically brand new, to what it is today, I know that place better than a lot of people who have either lived in Karachi or at one point lived in Karachi and, were in and out of the airport. And I gotta tell you, they got most of that portrayal right, but in some ways not so much. And this kind of applies to the entirety of the episode in many ways, because I'm gonna, kind of skip the formalities here. I mean, look, overall, the show was, again, it's still a very good show. The story is still moving along at a good pace. I do have some issues with it, but I do think in terms of how accurately they're portraying the culture, the environment, the background that the show is built on and around, the Pakistani culture, the South Asian history and culture and everything. They were going from strength to strength when they were showing us Miss Marvel and her family and Kamala Khan and her whole extended family, if you will, in Jersey City. I think that part they got very, very, accurate and on point. But once you start moving into that, deeper cut, you go into Karachi, you want to show Karachi, and you want to show the history of Pakistan and India and partition and all that. I think they're starting to sort of lose a little bit of authenticity. And the sad part about it is most people would not know that, because most people are not familiar with that part of the world, or as familiar with that part of the world and the history of that part of the world, the culture, and how the people who live there both perceive themselves and like to portray themselves in like a show or a movie. And I think this is where I think they could do better. Again, like I said, 80% of the way there, but that last 20% matters oh so much, because I understand some of the way they portrayed like the market, the street market, and some of the parts of the airport that they portrayed in the beginning of the episode, and other elements of how they're showing the basically what Karachi is, like even the train station. So it's high level stuff they get right, but like, for example, one gripe that I have with this show that I've sort of held on to for a long time without really going into it is I've lived in the US for like the last 14, somewhere around 14 years, 14, 15 years. And before that, I was in England, and before that, I was in Pakistan. I was born in Karachi. I was there till I was age 9. Then we moved out, and I would go back and visit almost every year. But I've gone through this patch where for the last 12 years, I haven't gone to Karachi. But still, I carry around with me a keychain, which I wish I had grabbed before I started doing this review. But I carry around a keychain, which is basically the flag of Pakistan. And I've got, the cricket team shirts from the several years when they've won tournaments and whatnot, and you celebrate that, and I'm very much there's a certain sense of patriotism that goes along with that, being born there and growing up there and whatnot. Living in the US, even there's a dual identity that that you draw from, and even for me, like a triple, like it's a three-way thing, because I lived in the UK for a while. I'm a big English soccer fan. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make though is one thing that this show that's been missing, and I'm pretty sure it's on purpose, and I realize the reason why, is they've never really truly shown the Pakistani flag anywhere, especially when there were any of the scenes and parts of the show that take place in the US in Jersey City and so on and so forth. And then even and I was like, okay, I'm kind of forgiving of that, sure, fine, whatever. I get that, like this is not, it's you're living in the U.S. in Jersey City. These are first generation kids who were practically born, like Kamala Khan was born in the U.S. I think it's implied, but So I get that there not wouldn't be as close of a connection, but then when you get back to when you visit Karachi, you're showing Karachi. I'm like, you gotta now show that, right? I mean, look, I totally get playing to so much to the whole partition storyline and how it ties into the mythology that the show's trying to build and everything, but this year Pakistan and India will celebrate their 75th anniversaries since independence, like from the British rule and the two countries coming to being in their modern current form. And even Bangladesh, Bangladesh not 75th anniversary, but now there are three countries. When they were initially in partition, it was Pakistan and India, and then later on Bangladesh separated away from Eastern Pakistan. It used to be East Pakistan, and West Pakistan is what today is known as Pakistan. East Pakistan is now Bangladesh. There's a lot of controversy, a lot of history behind that. Wars were fought over all those things. And I know that those are hard things to get into. You don't want to get into that. It creates division and all that. And I think leaning into the idea of partition and this sentiment that people, there's this generation of people, especially the ones who were alive during partition, who long for the days when, the two peoples of Pakistan and India were one. I get all of that. But in this episode, like, I think the lead in show overall, I think they need to sort of balance it out a little bit better, because yes, that is true that there's but there was a certain generation of people who were still alive from that time. But if you think about it, 75 years ago, most people who are alive now who remember crossing borders during that time in 1947 are at least in their 80s, if not 90s. So it's very, there's far and few in between. There's fewer people like that around today there, and then the people who were not of that generation, there's not as many of them who have studied that history to that degree and to that reverence. And all of that to say, I think the Pakistan Indian people are very much spiritually very similar. The cultures and the backgrounds and how we think about things, a lot of our languages, are very similar. Punjab was cut in half as a province when they partitioned the two countries, and there's a Punjab in India, there's a Punjab in Pakistan, and there's actually some religious sites that are located on what you would say would be the wrong sides of the border, if you will. Like if you are Sikh, there's a very holy place, a very holy site that you have to go on a pilgrimage, and you have to cross over into Pakistan to go to do it. And that ended up on the Pakistan side, whereas most of the Sikh population lives on the Indian side of Punjab. So that's one example of several things like that, where I think there's more that unites us and more that we share in our common heritage than we don't. But at the same time, unlike most people growing up today in Pakistan and India, think very much of the two countries as their own, countries with their own cultural identity in many ways. Again, there's a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of people identify with the Indian national identity and the Pakistani national identity. And that's not to say it's not to say that you can identify with one, but then that automatically antagonize the other. No, I think there's a lot of people out there who are like, I'm Pakistani or I'm an Indian, but that doesn't mean that I hate the other one, right? And it's everything has to be done with nuance, and I totally get that, but I really do feel like a lack for, even in this episode, like the closest we got to seeing a properly proportioned, correctly, proper, accurate, official version of the Pakistani flag was something that was backwards on the tourist, on the market, the street market, where this photographer who was asking for 1,500 rupees for this instant photo that he took of Kamala, and the flag was backwards, and the proportions of the star and the moon were not exactly accurate, and then there were these small flaglets that were hanging in the street market that were also not very accurately proportioned. Which, hey, I lived in Pakistan, celebrated Eid, celebrated the 14th of August, Independence Day for Pakistan when I was there. Trust me, they get that right when the day comes, and of course they would. Why wouldn't they? But I think, and I get why part of the reason why they do it this way, because they want to not alienate the Indian audience. There's a huge Indian audience that actually has Disney Plus. I think it's called Disney Hotstar in India, where Miss Marvel is airing as a show. And there's a good chunk of the cast in this show that is actually Indian and from Bollywood and other parts of Indian cinema and television that play characters in the show. And I love to see that crossover. I love to see it. I mean, you had Farhan Akhtar in this episode. Fantastic actor, one of the best of his generation, and a multi-talented actor, producer, director, singer, songwriter. Like, you know, the guy is multi-talented, and he played a great role as that leader of the Red Dagger group. Didn't last past the episode, okay, I get it, but I enjoyed that. Kamala Khan's mother, another example of, you know, great actress. They also had some Pakistani actors in this. I think Mavish Hayat is in this, and then Fawaz, I'm forgetting his last name, but there's a few, you know, Pakistani actors in this episode as well. I thought that was great, but again, I do think that, you know, don't compromise on proper, accurate representation of Pakistani culture as it exists today to appeal to another audience that you can potentially alienate. I mean, because I think at that point it becomes more of a business decision than it is a decision to accurately portray a culture. And all of that, I don't want to come across sounding like, you know, I have an inferiority complex or anything. I don't think that's my intention here. What I'm asking for is simply, you know, hey, they showed Teen Talwar, they showed, you know, again, not a super accurate representation of Jinnah International Airport, but they sort of had it. But, like, for example, you know, the supermarket, the street market scene. I'm like, you've been to Karachi, there's malls, there's supermarkets, there's malls and stuff. That street market sort of makes Karachi look like this third world small city. I'm like, no, Karachi is a city of lights. It's the bee's knees of the country in terms of you go to Karachi, you're like, this is Pakistan. This is one of the best examples of what Pakistan is, for all of its good, bad, and the ugly. That Karachi is a very good representation of what the country of Pakistan is. So in this episode, I felt like they did a lot of what a lot of Hollywood productions have done over the years. Even like Marvel, when they totally botched, in my opinion, the Bollywood sequence in Eternals, made Bollywood look bad and small. Similarly, I think here they caricaturize Karachi in some ways. That is a little, it bothers me. Like, and it's not just a Marvel critique, it's a critique of like how Hollywood likes to look at and should portray these countries that are to the world seen as, you know, second, third world countries. But I'm like, okay, but this is still, you know, that doesn't mean they're living in 1990s technology and era. Like, yeah, maybe that's what it was like. Like, if you watch one of the Rambo movies, when they go to, I think it's Quetta or Peshawar, and it's basically one of the border cities near Afghanistan, and Rambo's there to get some weapon or meet some guy before he goes on a mission in Afghanistan back from the Soviet occupation era. And he goes through a street market, and it's actually that one I was like, oh, that looks accurate, because it looks like they actually shot it there. Whereas I know with this one, most of those outdoor sequences were shot on a soundstage, or not a soundstage, but on a set that was erected in Georgia, in Atlanta. And that's where Marvel does a lot of their stuff. I get it. That's where they did a lot of those sequences in Age of Ultron and Captain America: Civil War, when they go to like those African nations and stuff. But I do feel like they need to, you know, stop promoting that stereotype. Like, you want to show Karachi of today, like you can go to a shopping mall, you can go to a street, like that kind of street market makes it look like Karachi is a very small city, very old city where people are. I'm like, yes, there's elements of that. You'll find those kinds of places in Karachi, but it's not an accurate, you know, representation of what you would see if you were to go there and somebody was going to take you out. Like, let's go to the street market. There's no such thing as a street market. There's many big, like there's Sadr, there's you know, other kinds of parts of the city and suburbs and districts, soft shopping districts and historic districts and things of that nature. And I think they, you know, if you're gonna go there, go all the way there. Don't caricaturize it. And, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do in the next episode. But I'm also now treading with a little bit of caution, because some of my suspicions, and even like the train station, I mean, Karachi station, I get it, you want to simplify it. Karachi's actually got like two big train stations, like Union and Kent Station. So like there's two different stations you could show as one or the other, but like again, they're sort of simplifying it. And to that degree, I get the reason why. And I think in spirit they did a pretty good job with regards to production design. But all in all, I do believe there's a lot of room for improvement, and I do hope that they can improve upon some of those criticisms that I have.